Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. This podcast is an audio extract from the Society's monthly meeting in February 2025. In 1950, Zell Meehan was appointed Secretary to the Lord Mayor of Newcastle. In 1956, aged 37, Zell married and, as was the custom of the time, was expected to resign. However, Zell refused to do so. Dr. Duke Conway explores the battle that ensued and the attitudes towards women at the time and since.
Tonight's talk is about a feisty Novocastrian, Zell Meehan, and the people and places with which she interacted. And I'm giving this talk on unceded Awabakal land, and I pay my respects to all First Nations people in this country. Zell Meehan and the battle she fought with Newcastle City Council came to my attention when I was doing my research for my PhD thesis on the women's movement in Newcastle. And the extra research I needed for this talk, I especially like to thank the Newcastle local history librarians. They are very helpful. And Margaret Badger, who's the daughter of Joy Cummings, former Lord Mayor of Newcastle, and Robin Gordon, who some of you would know, who knew Zell through the Newcastle Girls High Ex-Students Union and the Victoria League. Now, Zell Meehan was born Amy Gazelle Burke in the working class Newcastle suburb of Plattsburgh, an old coal mining village, on 22nd of August 1918 to Esmond Edward Burke, aged 27, originally from Singleton, and Amy Gazelle Burke, yes, the same name. Her mother gave her daughter the exact same name. She was Nee Bennett. She had been born Amy Gazelle Bennett. And her parents lived in the corner of Clark and Rancloud streets in Plattsburgh. Other than the Plattsburgh School, the suburb is now under the umbrella of Wallsend. Zell was born in her parents' miners' cottage at 38 Clark Street, Plattsburgh at the time. Zell's only sibling, a sister Olive, was born in 1920. Their father, who was known as Ted Burke, was a racehorse trainer.
And in particular, the horses he trained were owned by his parents-in-law.
Among those he raced were Lynn Olive, Lord Zell, Beau Zell, and Lady Zell. The Burke family were parishioners at St Luke's Church of England in Wallsend. And thank you to the Family History Society, I downloaded a copy of all their St Luke's birth, baptism and marriage registry. And Zell's parents married there, as did Zell's sister, and both parents' funeral services were there. Displaying her innate organising abilities, in 1937, Zell helped establish St Luke's Younger Set, which arranged dances and fun activities. And the following year, she was chosen as the church's candidate for the Inter-Parish Queen fundraising competition. The new Lambton Parish candidate raised the most money. I suspect it was because it was the most affluent suburb in Newcastle at the time. And despite Zell's abilities, Wallsend Parish raised the second least amount. The Burke children attended Plattsburgh Primary School, directly across from their grandparents' house, and a hop, step and a jump from their house. As the Ducks of the primary school, Zell was selected to attend Newcastle Girls High School in 1930, which was its first full year of operation in Hamilton South. Each of the 500 girls who enrolled in 1930 received a souvenir booklet which listed Zell in Class 1D. Whatever that grading might signify, Zell won prizes and certificates throughout her high school. For example, she came second in the whole year in her third year and topped mechanics in her fourth year. Interesting subject to study. In Zell's 50, she was going on to do the leaving certificate. In August 1934, her father, aged only 44, died in Wallsend Mining District Hospital, as it was called. He had been in ill health for some time, but his death was unexpected. His early death, of course, affected the family's finances. Jack Lang, as Premier of New South Wales, had introduced widows' pensions in 1926, so Zell's mother would have received a pension. But her father's death impacted on Zell's dream of being a teacher. Her leaving certificate results that year of 2 A's and 4 B's were not sufficient to gain the vitally necessary scholarship to study at Sydney Teachers College. Now, it had to be Sydney because there was no Teachers College in Newcastle until 1949. So Zell decided to repeat fifth year in 1935. Now, she'd always been a year younger than the average student, so this was okay age-wise, but of course would have cost her mother money because she wasn't working again for another year. Zell dropped French this time and replaced it with chemistry, perhaps aiming to be a maths science. I think you had to be a maths science teacher. With a hint to the future, Zell won a prize in February that year in an essay competition conducted by the Newcastle City Council's Electricity Supply Department. She also did well in the school exams, coming first in Maths 1 and impressively in the recently taken up chemistry. She topped the year, and she was second in English and Maths 2. So not only was she brainy, she was an all-rounder. Although only achieving 2 A's and 4 B's again in the leaving certificate, this time she was awarded a scholarship. However, the decision was taken that her mother could not afford to cover her living away from home allowance expenses. So Zell gave up on her dream and opted to do a secretarial course at Newcastle Business College in Telford Street. This would have included shorthand, typing and business principles. Now, the first headmistress of Newcastle Girls High had a bias against commercial careers. And when the firm Hemingway and Robertson offered a free accountancy and secretarial course to the commercial student with the highest pass in the intermediate certificate, the headmistress turned it down. A little family history interlude. Hemingway and Robertson, based in the AMP chambers in Hunter Street, was managed by my maternal grandfather at that time in those years. So it was likely he who had made the offer. The second Girls' High headmistress from 1931 thought the purpose of a high school course was not to create a human typing machine to do an incredible number of words a minute, but to train intelligence, taste and character. So it is ironic that after 6 years at an academic-oriented high school, Zell was forced to choose the secretarial pathway. Robin Gordon recalls Zell saying that she received a scholarship to Business College, and given their scholarship exam only tested English and arithmetic, Zell would certainly have had excellent results. After her course, she had no trouble in finding employment, and in mid-1936 started work as a typist at the aforementioned Electricity Supply Department, then based in the still fairly new Town Hall, only opened 7 years previously. In September 1939, her department transferred to the brand new Nesca House. By the way, Nesca, if any of you know or don't know, stands for Newcastle Electricity Supply Council Administration. In 1940, Zell moved up the career ladder by being appointed private secretary to the manager. World War II was underway and Nesca House was protected in case of attack. And as we all know, Newcastle was shelled, though to little effect, by the Japanese in 1942. In 1950, Zell applied for the position of secretary to the Lord Mayor. Bill Burgess, the young town clerk, these days called the Chief Executive, selected Zell because of her outstanding qualifications. Burgess was later to become an antagonist, for a time at least. The women employees of Nesca, not the men, just the women, held a farewell dinner for Zell at the Bowery Coffee Shop in Bolton Street in the city, at the time the place to be seen. Zell took up her new duties in September 1950 as Secretary to the Lord Mayor, Alderman Harry Quinlan, independent, who had the distinction of being Newcastle's first Lord Mayor after the council received royal assent to use the title in 1948, the first Australian city other than a capital to be allowed to do so. 3 months later, Frank Perdue from the Citizens Group became Lord Mayor. The Citizens Group represented the interests of the local business community and mainly existed to run for Newcastle council elections. Aside from the usual secretarial tasks, Zell became the stopgap between the ratepayers and the Lord Mayor, whose office was visited by an unending stream of citizens. It was said that she had the charm and ability to soothe the most raucous person who came in wanting the Lord Mayor's throat over a pothole. She became popular with the Newcastle Morning Herald topics journalist for humorous anecdotes. For example, when Zell asked one visitor his name, he said, "That's between God and me." Asked why he wanted to see the Lord Mayor, he said, "That's between the Lord Mayor and me." Eventually, she dug out of him that he had not paid his electric light bill, but he wanted to see the Lord Mayor about God's business. Then, on his way out, he signed the visitor's book, "God Hath Spoken." I'm not sure if he got help with his bill or not. Zell also dealt with requests for information. For example, in 1953, she was asked, what year was the model of the jockey removed from out the front of the Centennial Hotel? Zell was able to ascertain that each year, after the running of the Newcastle Cup, the model's shirt was repainted with the winning jockey's colours, and the model was removed after a lorry had knocked it over. I learned from Trove that the Centennial Hotel was the headquarters of the Newcastle Jockey Club, and that the cast iron model lost a couple of limbs. He was unrepairable. As mentioned, Zell's father was a horse trainer. Well, his most notable victory was when Lord Zell won the Newcastle Cup in 1922. So that year, the model jockey's shirt would have been painted yellow and white. Zell played an integral role in many fundraising appeals. In 1952, the brother of the late boxer Les Darcy from Maitland opened an appeal in aid of the family of the late Dunghutti boxer Dave Sands, who was killed in a car crash and who was aged only 26. Originally from Kempsey, Sands had trained in Newcastle, so Zell was secretary of that appeal. She was also secretary-treasurer for the annual Lord Mayoral Debutante Balls. One of her tasks was to interview possible debutantes and accompany them to rehearsals at Lambert's dance studio, run by very well-known husband and wife teachers on the first floor of the Hamilton Council Chambers in Beaumont Street. As a member of the official party at these balls, she met many notable people, including the Governor-General, who the debutantes were presented to in 1952, and in 1953, the New South Wales Governor at the Lord Mayoral Coronation Ball, when a large tinted photograph of the Queen was the centrepiece of the City Hall stage, and the debutantes danced the coronation minuet with their partners. That year, Zell was accompanied to the ball by Mr. P.J. Meehan, which is the first newspaper mention of her and her future husband together. Zell considered herself a careerist, and that was partly the reason why she delayed marrying. But on 7th of April 1956, aged 37, She married Pat Meehan, a divorced departmental manager, aged 48. Zell was Anglican and Pat was Catholic. So they probably chose St Andrew's Presbyterian Church as neutral ground. And actually the Reverend Keir, who was the Reverend there, was known to, he was prepared to marry Catholics, I was told. They settled in Merewether. Now, her marriage and its aftermath was significant, not only to Zell's personal life, but also to her working life and the career paths of women employees of Newcastle City Council, and undoubtedly the wider community. In Newcastle, for far longer than Sydney, married women were largely excluded from the labour market because of the belief that the man was the breadwinner and the wife should stay at home. This belief was shared by the ALP, trade unions, councils, public utilities, and many employers. But since World War II, when women worked in a wider range of jobs and many worked after marriage, women had begun refusing to accept stereotypical gender roles and limitations, and Zell was one of those women. She refused to follow the council custom to hand in her resignation after her marriage. When she informed the town clerk, Bill Burgess, he said her continuing to work was unfair to single female members of staff who desired to advance to her well-paid position. Burgess told the alderman that the council's well-defined and long-established practice, these are important words, was that the service of a female was deemed to automatically end on marriage, and he recommended that Zell be suspended. A controversy began in council and raged for weeks. Zell was on a honeymoon, but her friends kept her posted with the media reports. The Lord Mayor at the time, Doug McDougall, from the Citizens Group, thought the council's policy was outmoded and strongly opposed any move to dismiss Mrs. Meehan. I believe in equality of the sexes, he said. If it's all right for a man to marry and continue at work, why is it not right for a woman? Mrs. Meehan is a most capable secretary with many years' experience. It would be a pity if her training was to be wasted because of old-fashioned prejudices. Very admirable words, though slightly marred by his complaint that the council would end up with a lot of old maids. Oh. Alderman Charlie Jones, a boilermaker and trade unionist representing the Labor Party, did not believe that wives should go out to work. Let's face it, he insisted, in any society, the man is looked on as a breadwinner. Burgess was asked to compile a full report on the matter. Barbara Curthoys, a local member of the Union of Australian Women, wrote to the Newcastle Morning Herald, "Women's rights are affirmed in the United Nations Charter, proclaimed for the entire world in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Remember, it's only 1956. But evidently, Newcastle City Council regards Newcastle as isolated from the rest of the world, as it prevents the employment of married women. Mrs. Meehan has my sympathy in becoming the centre of this age-old controversy," she added. And she also predicted that in the future, women would be able to have career, family and children. When the Burgess report was presented to the next council meeting, the Lord Mayor was amazed to learn that the council actually had no specific resolution regarding the employment of married women. Alderman Jones dismissed that. The policy was known to everyone, whether it was an actual resolution on the books or not. Burgess thought it would be dangerous for the council to deviate from its policy. Alderman Rundle, a Citizens Group member and a draper from Wall's End, thought she should resign because her husband should keep her. His wife had a full-time job looking after him without going out to work. Her place was in the house, he said. At least he didn't say in the kitchen. Alderman Nesbitt, also Citizens Group, declared the reason for married women wishing to work was usually greed. And married women working raised the vital issue of neglect of homes, leading to juvenile delinquency. And he said, as you know, modern women are fond of the grog. Alderman Skelton, Independent, in a refreshing contrast, said he was brought up in a modern age and had a modern wife who believed in equality. I think the Newcastle Herald journalists had great, they covered this session really closely. When it came to the vote of whether Zell would retain her position, 2 aldermen abstained. Disappointingly, one of them was Mary Pepperell, the first woman elected to Newcastle City Council, a woman who had grown-up children and was active in the ALP and many community organisations. Not sure how many people know that Mary Pepperell was the first woman on Newcastle City Council. She was against married women working. But on learning, the council actually already employed a few married women with specialised skills, but their employment was not permanent, had to be extended every 3 months. And she thought, well, if it was good enough for one, it was good enough for another. However, she did not vote in support of Zell because she said she was this way and that way. But Zell Meehan won the day. The council decided by 13 votes to 5 that she should retain her position. And later that month, they rescinded any resolutions on their books regarding employment of married women, a move which Alderman Rundle described as going against everything decent, Christian and moral. Ironically, the following year, Charlie Jones became Lord Mayor. He recalled in a 1980 interview, he was specifically asked about this, Zell and I got on very well together when I was Lord Mayor, and we've got on very well since, he said. Married women working was an issue in those days. It's no longer an issue. He made a good politician, Charlie. The interviewer commented that they were both straightforward people. Jones responded, oh God, yeah, she'll tell you the time of day. Certainly Zell has elsewhere admitted, if you're not going to assert yourself, you're going to be servile for the rest of your life. Now, Jones was only Lord Mayor for 1 year because in 1958, he won the federal seat of Newcastle and he actually went on to become a Minister for Transport in the Whitlam government. Now, Zell and her husband, they never had any children, and she continued working for many years as a common sense confidant and advisor to Newcastle's Lord Mayors. Among her many tasks, she helped celebrate their birthdays and had the opportunity in September 1974, to welcome Joy Cummings as Newcastle and Australia's first Lord Mayor, first woman Lord Mayor. Asked her reaction to Cummings' election, Zell said, frankly, I think we're in for an interesting time. She helped Cummings find her feet and they shared many interesting events. On Christmas Eve that year, Cyclone Tracy devastated Darwin, and on Christmas night, the Lord Mayor opened a fundraising appeal on the radio. Zell went into work on Boxing Day and found people queued up waiting to donate to the appeal. They didn't even complain about waiting, she remembered. All in all, the appeal collected over $350,000, a generous contribution from working class Newcastle and the region. And in 1974, I think, the BHP was not employing because of the oil prices. So that was very generous. Now, according to Joy's daughter, Margaret Badger, Zell was a conservative woman, a member of the Victoria League, and which, was a monarchist organisation. And she remained devoted to Frank Perdue from this citizens group and a rabid anti-communist, I just might add. But Zell and Joy Cummings, a Labor Party stalwart, became great friends and had the same wicked sense of humour. The council usually gave celebrity visitors to the city a small gift. So when Dame Edna Everidge, who often referred to her jam making, came to perform at the Civic Theatre in 1979, after a discussion with the Lord Mayor, Joy found a holder for a jam drip spoon as his present. Dame Edna was delighted. In 1976, Zell celebrated 40 years of service with the council and congratulatory telegrams poured in. Alderman Jensen from Wyong Council wished her a long and happy retirement. Zell replied, "I have no intention of retiring. I'm well, healthy, and cannot see any reason why I should not use my brains." I thought that could have been her argument in 1956. Also in 1976, Zell was awarded an MBE in the New Year's Honours List for her years of work. Oh, by the way, she thanked her husband, who stood by her and supported her through all this, for her many years of support. And one lovely tribute she received was a floral arrangement from the council's gardeners, because she'd helped them win a number of awards. In 1977, the council staff moved into the new administration building, the Roundhouse. Zell had good reason to complain. She had to leave her roomy, tastefully decorated office to go to something a lot smaller. Now, outside of work, Zell's favourite recreation was golf. When asked how she could find time to play, she said, "Well, you only work 6 days a week. I play golf on Sundays." From at least the early 1950s, she had belonged to the Steelworks Golf Club at Shortland, which, like all golf clubs at the time, men were members and women were associates who were not allowed to play on Saturdays. There was a ladies' day on Wednesdays, but as a working woman, Sundays were Zell's only option. She was an occasional prize winner. Her first ever prize was 6 cake forks for a Medley 4-ball Stableford. Golfers will know what that means. The lowest handicap Zell achieved was a fairly impressive 14, but she didn't play enough to maintain it. She did have the pleasure of playing at the opening of the council-owned Beresfield Golf Club in 1983 with the Lord Mayor as her caddy. Now, when Zell Meehan retired at the end of that year, 1983, Joy Cummings said farewelling her was one of the saddest moments of her life. They formed such a good relationship. Only a few months later, Joy Cummings sadly suffered a stroke and had to retire herself. Now, because Zell won the battle to continue with the council after her marriage, she had been secretary to 8 Newcastle Lord Mayors. They were all different personalities, she said, and had to be treated differently. You had to be adaptable and completely impartial. The first 3 months were always the hardest. You're sizing them up and they're sizing you up. You never refer to what the previous Lord Mayor did, and you need a lot of patience and a sense of humour, which it seems she had. She told the Newcastle Herald it had been very refreshing to have a woman as Lord Mayor. A woman gives you more credit, she said. Now, Zell Meehan died on the 15th of February 1998, aged 79, and her funeral service was held in St Augustine's Church in Merriweather. However, she was buried with her husband Pat, who had died 20 years earlier, in the Catholic section of the Sandgate Cemetery. Zell had considered herself fitted to work in local government because she was Newcastle through and through, which I hope this talk has shown. And I think also she was fitted because she displayed the intelligence and character her headmistress at Newcastle Girls High School had wanted to cultivate in the students. During her long career, Zell watched Newcastle growing up, as she said, culturally, educationally, commercially, and industrially. Zell herself contributed to Newcastle's growing maturity by helping change attitudes to married women. As the Newcastle Herald said in an editorial tribute after her death, Newcastle was all the better for her determined stand. Thank you.
Zell Meehan didn't set out to be a feminist icon, but through her determination, her loyalty to her community, and her refusal to accept outdated rules, she helped change attitudes towards married women, and her story reminds us that progress is often fought quietly by women who simply refuse to step aside. A complete version of this presentation, along with others given by our guest speakers, can be viewed on our YouTube channel. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and look forward to you joining us again on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.